Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Jason Freeman. I'm a producer here in the Author Events office, and tonight it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Dan Pfeiffer. Dan Pfeiffer was the White House Director of Communications in the Obama administration from 2009 to 2013. What a sympathetic crowd we have tonight. All right, yeah. Where he also served in various other roles through the 2008 presidential campaign, transition team, and White House staff. He is also the New York Times best-selling author of Yes, We Still Can, Politics in the Age of Obama, Twitter, and Trump, called by Esquire an amusing and insightful account of the shifting tides of politics of the internet age and a guide to fighting back in the Trump era. He is also the co-host of the popular Pod Save America, a no-nonsense, delightfully pun-named breakdown of the week's news that boasts millions of listeners per episode. Mr. Pfeiffer's new book is called UnTrumping America, a plan to make America a democracy again. This work offers a political roadmap for defeating the current occupant of the Oval Office and his friends in order to regain America's dignity, ideals, and stability. A Booklist review claims that it, quote, lays out the path for Democrats to save the day, not by beating Republicans at their own dirty, he convincingly claims, game, but by, actually doing democracy. Perhaps the goal of this book and of the current struggle for the very soul of America could be summarized in a slightly loftier way, funnily enough, by a Republican president. Perhaps, quote, every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Tonight's author will be in conversation with Alyssa Mastromonaco, author of Who Thought This Was a Good Idea? And other questions you should have answers to when you work in the White House. Mastromonaco has been a senior advisor and spokesperson for NARAL since July 2018, and previously was the president of Global Communications Strategy and Talent at A&E, the chief operating officer of Vice Media, and served as the White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations from 2011 to 2014. And yes, she is also a frequent guest on Pod Save America. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Dan Pfeiffer and Alyssa Mastromonaco to the Free Library.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? Oh, there we are. Okay. Does everybody have their books? See, I've read mine like 3 times already. Okay, here we go. So, how many people want some hope? That's what I thought. You came to the right place.
Who are the people who didn't raise their hands?
They watch MSNBC. JK. It was a joke. Jeez. So one of the things I think for those of you who haven't already read Dan's book that you will really enjoy is that I do find it gives us a real roadmap for what we have to do, which is, what the book promises, so that's good. But I always tell Dan that I can liken anything to a music lyric, and I have adopted the following lyric for this book, which is, man, the dopes that there is still hope, from Bruce Springsteen to this bus stop at 82nd Street. So you have a lot to look forward to. Pfeiffer.
Yes.
How is writing this book different from your last book?
Well, when I wrote my first book, which came out 2 years ago, it was the first time I had written anything longer than 20 pages since college. And so, throughout the whole process of writing the first book, there was this, existential dread that I could not accomplish the task. And I used to joke during the process that though the title of the book was called Yes, We Still Can, the working title was I Don't Know If I Can. But I did finish it. It did come out. This book...
Number 1 New York Times bestseller. Sorry. I'm his hype lady.
Yes. Thank you, hype
You're
lady.
welcome.
That book was really my story, and hopefully I tried to use that story to do 2 things in that first book. One was learn some lessons from the Obama years that could be applied to the struggles Democrats are having right now, but then also hopefully give a lesson to young people about how valuable a career in politics could be, and encourage people to get involved in the process. This book was different because it was an argument. right? It wasn't a story. And that was, in some ways, more challenging to write because I had saved up a bunch of really good stories in case I had a book to write one day that I used all of them in the first book, so the second book was harder. But in another way, it was easier because I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and I knew the fears about American politics that drove me and the things that I wanted people to be doing to put Democrats on a better path. So it had the advantage of like having a point more than just, hey, learn about me.
But I mean, that was good too.
Sure.
Was there anything, so like obviously you set out with a point of view, and this book, it's not just pontification, it's historical, there's tons of context. Was there anything that you found in researching it and putting it together that was like startling or surprising to you? Or like that you hadn't thought of in that way?
Well, I mean, just to take it back a step, the reason the book is called UnTrumping America, A Plan to Make America Democracy Again. The reason I wrote the book was because even though I believe there is nothing more important than winning this election in 2020, I think our current president is an existential threat to the country and the planet. I also believe that beating Donald Trump in 2020 is not enough. And that we have to, as Democrats, recognize that Donald Trump did not break our democracy. We have Donald Trump because we have a broken democracy. And if Democrats do not take on the task of making America more democratic, small d, to making it a place where the actual opinions of, we're making it a place where the majority of this country, which is younger, growing more diverse, and quite progressive, has political power commensurate with their place in society, we're going to live in a world, no matter how many elections we win, where conservatives like Mitch McConnell continue to decide what is possible in American politics.
In the book, you say that Democrats are better but win less, which makes me very sad. Can you explain why?
Well, I mean, I go through in the book, I lay out how even though we have won a number of elections, obviously Barack Obama in 2008, 2012, very meaningful to us who worked on those campaigns. And we've won like important policy victories like the Affordable Care Act, the Lead Better Equal Pay Act. I mean, a whole host of things that happened in the Obama administration that were very important. At the same time those things were happening, the Republicans were engaged in a very specific strategy to protect their political power, even though they were becoming a smaller minority in the country. At state levels, they gerrymandered congressional legislative districts. They passed laws like voter ID to make it harder for communities of color to vote. At the national level, they were rigging our courts in a conservative direction. And every one of those things that they do makes it harder for us to win the next election. And if we don't win the next election, we can't undo those things. And so what I've tried to do with this book is to wake people up to just how the Republicans have, with some help from the founders who had some ideas that have not aged well, have, it's a bold thing to say in Philly, I know, but they have put Republicans in a position where even though they have fewer voters than Democrats, they have more political power.
It's a good answer.
Well, thank you.
Just saying. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in real life, like in this moment.
In the primary?
In the primary. Let's talk a little about the primary. So kind of a wild couple of days. Well, one, yay, Harvey Weinstein's going to jail. That's good. But last week, there was a wild debate, which some people had very favorable opinions of, other people didn't, when Elizabeth Warren unhinged her jaw and ate Mike Bloomberg. I mean, love him or hate him, it's what happened. And so she had a big moment. People expected a big boom in the Nevada caucuses. Was that reasonable? This is a let's take that one first. Okay. Was that reasonable to expect?
A multi-part question,
Did she fall short, or was it even reasonable to expect such a bounce because of early voting?
Well, just one thing on that first is, Alyssa and I did an event like this in New York City on Wednesday night, the night of the debate. We had the event ended before the debate started, but I was signing books afterwards, and in the line, people were watching the debate on their phones, and they would get to the front of the line to get me to sign the book, and they would be like, holy shit, you have no idea what's happening.
It's true.
Yeah, people. It was a wild thing to experience vicariously through people in a book
And
line.
it's kind of nice when you're not actually working for the people in the debates, because if that had happened to Barack Obama in 2008, we wouldn't have enjoyed it at all. But this is kind of entertaining.
Instead of in that one debate in 2012.
That was bad.
I was like,
Colorado.
oh, don't remind us of that.
Colorado.
So Elizabeth Warren in Nevada had this amazing debate, came in fourth in Nevada.
Yeah.
And so the question is, should we have expected more? It's hard to say. In Nevada, 70,000 people early voted. Most of them early voted before that debate happened. According to some of the entrance polling, where they ask the caucus goers before they go in why they're going in or who they're going to support, Elizabeth Warren did much better on people who decided day of than people who decided a week ago or a few weeks ago.
Right.
And this was never going to be one of her best states. So the upside would be there's a national poll that came out Sunday, which had her rocketing to second behind Bernie Sanders. So it's clear it had some momentum nationally. And so the question will be, A, can she carry this forward in the debate on Tuesday night? There is another debate. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
And then is she able to beat expectations in South Carolina? So I think the timing was unfortunate that the debate happened so close to the Nevada caucus that that so many people had voted before it happened, so she couldn't maximize the benefit of that. So we don't have a real measure of how impactful that debate was, at least in the states that are voting now.
So tomorrow, like you said, debate in South Carolina.
Oh my God, that's tomorrow.
Yeah,
Tuesday's
it's
tomorrow.
tomorrow. It's tomorrow. And we're both going to have to watch it on Twitter again. Who has to do what tomorrow night? No, I'll set the scene for you.
Please do.
So Bernie's leading. Biden, the expectations are super high for him to stay alive. Bloomberg is dumping lots of oppo on everyone, but got eaten alive in the last debate. So he definitely has to do something tomorrow. So in order for people to do it, what do people have to do tomorrow night? For whom is the debate most important tomorrow?
It is important for everyone other than Tom Steyer.
Oh, Tom.
I mean, look, we are a
He's a mensch.
He is a great guy who's done a lot for climate change in this country. This is do or die for every candidate other than Bernie Sanders, right? The race is coming on us fast. So South Carolina, debate is tomorrow. Apparently today's Monday. Debate is tomorrow. South Carolina is Saturday. Super Tuesday is 3 days later, that Tuesday. 40% of the delegates will be off the board after Super Tuesday. And because of the very strange way that Democrats pick our presidential candidates, we do our delegates by proportion. And it's even more complicated than if you get, in a normal world, if you did it by proportion, if you got 30% of the vote, you get 30% of the delegates. That was too simple for us. So we did it statewide, you get some, and then with every district, we decided to give some districts even numbers, which means people tie a lot. And so basic point is that after Super Tuesday, if someone, at this point most likely to be Bernie Sanders, has a large lead in delegates, it's very hard for people to catch up to them. So this debate is critical because Michael Bloomberg has to complete sentences successfully. Biden has to, South Carolina's do or die for Joe Biden. He has said that as his firewall. And so he needs a strong debate to have some momentum going into the South Carolina election. He's going to get the endorsement on Wednesday of Jim Clyburn, who's the senior African-American member of Congress there and the number 3 member of the House.
Do you think it's a little weird that he's announced he was going to endorse him on Wednesday? I feel like we wouldn't have done that.
He didn't. What he did was he promised always that if he made an endorsement, it would be after the debate. But everyone knew he was always going to endorse Joe Biden, so it came out. It leaked, is what happened.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar all need Bafo. They have to do it on Tuesday what Elizabeth Warren did last Wednesday and give themselves momentum heading into South Carolina and the hope that they can do well and then get momentum heading into Super Tuesday. And then Bernie Sanders, everyone is coming for him. This is
knives out, as the kids say.
Oh, those crazy kids. I don't think that's a thing kids
Saw it
say.
on It's what Ira says.
Okay. All right. And so, like, for him, he's going to have to survive that. I think demonstrate to Democratic voters who may be concerned about his electability that he can handle these attacks. And I think he also needs to, or this is a big opportunity for him to put forward a unifying message to make it clear to the supporters of the other candidates that he would welcome them into his movement were he to become the nominee.
He should just send Larry David. There's literally no upside in going in person, I'd say. So after South Carolina, whatever the results are, like you said, then we have Super Tuesday, and you have a lot of very panicked people who, like I said, are watching cable news, who are obsessed with the idea of electability. And they're looking at these polls that come out every day. Nobody really knows what the polls mean or the sample size or anything like that. How focused should people be on the polls and or trying to suss out their candidate based on some idea that's very ambiguous of electability?
Well, you ask any Democratic voter what they think, and the overwhelming majority of them say the thing they care most about is, can this person beat Donald Trump? Now, the problem is that's an unanswerable question, right? Because then it goes, well, who's the best person to take on Donald Trump? And we do not know. And because it's impossible to see into the future. But it's also hard because the concept of quote unquote electability is inherently born of misogyny and racism, in the sense that what has happened since 2000, which may seem somewhat crazy, at least on racism, because the last Democrat who won was an African American. And he won twice. And he's the only president since Eisenhower to get 51% of the vote twice. And he won by huge amounts. But since the 2016 election, the entire media narrative about how Trump won is filtered through the mentality of a hypothetical white guy from Wisconsin. And so you have a lot of Democratic voters who presume sexism on that person and then reflect sexism back in because Hillary lost, so reflect sexism back into their view of what electable is, right? Which is why Elizabeth Warren, who was leading in this primary for a long time, stumbled when people questioned her electability. And what did they question her electability for? Supporting Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan. Bernie Sanders, who wrote the damn bill, as he would say, has not suffered a similar fate. And so it's very hard to, I have no idea who the best person to take on Trump is. And no one else does either, because you can guess about it, but we don't know how they'll do when they're in a general election, and we don't know what the world will be like in November. Like when we were working for Barack Obama, one of the things that people, like political prognosticators, thought was a huge weakness of Obama's was that he was too calm and aloof. Mm-hmm. Like he didn't get passionate enough. Why wouldn't he be angry? Now, I can only imagine if the first African-American to be a presidential nominee had been angry, how that would have been handled. But it was like, where's his passion? And then, right, a month before the election, the economy crashes. We're in the middle of the financial crisis. And all of a sudden, Obama's calm demeanor is a huge asset. And it's seen as, like when people were looking at him and McCain, Obama seemed like the person you'd want in a crisis because he was calm. So we don't know what's going to happen in the world that's going to affect that. And so ultimately, the only thing I tell people is make your best guess. Who you like the most? Do you think that person can win? If so, vote for him. And anything anyone else says is...
Or her, correct.
Or her, thank you.
He meant
I'm
that.
sorry. Vote for him or her. And that's what you have to do, because I don't think any of us can know the answer to who the person who is best able to take on Trump. I think, I will stipulate this, I think every one of them can win. Every one of them can win. They all have strengths. They all have some weaknesses, and how they maximize their strengths and navigate their weaknesses will determine whether they can win.
They can all win. I definitely have favorites, but they can all win. So talking about whoever the nominee is, what is their message? What is the Democratic message to fight Donald Trump in November? What should people be talking about?
So in the book, one of the things I did, one of the chapters is a memo I wrote to the future Democratic nominee. As I was writing it, I had some concerns that we would resolve this before it came out, but lo and behold,
fear that.
Fear not. We got plenty of time. And so I offer a bunch of different views on how I think you navigate how a Democrat can beat Trump. And so there's a couple pieces of advice in there. One is, I think the conventional wisdom is that when you're running against an incumbent, you should make it a referendum on the incumbent. Right? Let's just do an up or down vote on whether they've been good at their job. I think that is a terrible idea. It's a particularly terrible idea with Trump because voters are not naive about that he's not awesome. Like he's not pulling the wool over anyone's eyes. They're very well aware of his flaws. So what you need to do if you want to beat him is you have to make it a choice between two people. You have to spend time explaining why the Democratic nominee must spend time explaining why they are the better choice, why they have the better vision, what their values are, what their character is, why they're the people that the voters should gamble on. Because voters, you see this in poll after poll, they actually think president should get 2 terms. That is standard. I know it doesn't say that in the Constitution, but they think there's a burden of proof to get someone out. And so the way you meet that burden of proof is to say to them, you took a gamble on this person. And I think voters, to a person, knew it was a gamble, right? And here's why that gamble didn't work out, and here's why you should take a gamble on me. So that's one. The second thing is, another piece of advice would be, Trump's strength, and his primary strength, and the one that has held the entire thing up, is the state of the economy, right? I mean, today's market notwithstanding, what has been true for the last 4 years is that Donald Trump was able to not screw up Barack Obama's economy. And he has been able to the unemployment rate is historically low. The stock market has been high, not so much today. And so some would say, well, don't hit him, look for his weakness, don't go to his strength. I think you have to hit Donald Trump where he's strong. And we have to take on the economic argument. And if we don't take on and win the economic argument, the Democrats will lose this election. And I think the way you do that is you have to reframe the conversation. Take it from the question, if the question is the economy working, Donald Trump will be reelected. If the question is, who is the economy working for, we have a shot. And what that means is talking about, there's some messaging I offer in the book in the hopes that one of the 97 people who are running for president will pick it up and read it. But, I mean, Joe Biden's headquarters is like 3 blocks that way or something, so maybe we can drop some off. But the message is essentially, under Donald Trump, corporations have never made more money. They never paid less in taxes. Wages have barely budged at the same time that the cost of healthcare, housing, college, and retirement have gone way up. Donald Trump has promised that if he is reelected, he will cut Social Security and Medicare to ensure that corporations continue to get big tax cuts and that everyone in this audience will pay more for their Amazon Prime subscription than Amazon paid in federal taxes last year.
So, you can clap, it's true. So that's the message. In the book, you talk about how Democrats cannot rely on the mainstream media to get that message out.
Progressive podcasts.
Oh. Pod saved something?
Anything
America?
like that.
So progressive pods as one tent pole. What are other ways the Democrats should be focusing on getting the message out to actual voters?
One of the reasons I wrote the book was to also try to shake what I view, at least, to be some sense in people, which is I have worked in political communications my entire career. When I started, you were faxing press releases. If you sent someone an email, you didn't expect them to respond until Monday. The local newspapers were a huge deal. Local TV was a huge deal. The Twitter didn't exist. Facebook didn't exist. The smartphone didn't exist. Over that time, things have changed dramatically. And where we have ended up today is, and I think too many people within Democratic politics are sort of willfully naive about this, which is even though most of the reporters who work at major news outlets are at least socially liberal, and most of their editors are socially liberal, and most of the people who work at the tech companies that distribute the news, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, are socially liberal. Most of the people who run those companies are socially liberal, and if they vote for Democrats, and if they give money to Democrats. Despite all of that quote-unquote liberal bias, the media is fundamentally biased towards Trumpian conservatism. And that is because Facebook, which is the primary distributor of information in the world, is powered by an algorithm that is fueled by outrage. And outrage is the language of Trump's Republican Party. It is not the outrage. It is not the language of our party. And we are constantly on the defensive because the political conversation in this country is tilted right in that direction on all things. This is something we started seeing in the White House in about 2014. When it used to be we would do focus groups of voters and we would ask them, like, have you heard about this, huge deal in D.C.? And these would just be undecided voters somewhere, and they would have no idea. They just living their lives, worrying about going to work, their kids, taking care of their parents, whatever it is, don't know about the crazy thing on Fox News. Around 2014, we'd ask people, and now they knew everything. And they were reading back to us quote unquote fake Fox News scandals in the exact language of Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson. And you would ask them, where did you see it? Facebook. On any given day, 9 of the 10 news stories with the most engagement on Facebook are from conservative outlets. Fox News, Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, Breitbart, these sort of Facebook bot farms that exist that are pushing out there. So that's all biased against Democrats. So what do we do about it? 2 things. First, we have to come up with strategies to navigate this election. And that is going to require a complete shift in mentality where Democrats no longer rely on the mainstream media as the primary way to get their message out. They have instead of communications, they're thinking content. Instead of coverage, they're thinking conversation. Second thing is, in the long term, and I say this with the obvious bias of someone who works in the progressive media, but in the long term, Democrats need to build up a progressive media infrastructure. Now, that doesn't mean we want a Democratic Fox. That would not work for our viewers. The Democrats are not interested in propaganda. When you do studies of where they get their information, Democrats get their information from a whole host of different media sources. Republicans get it from Fox and Rush Limbaugh overwhelmingly, and which is scary in and of itself. And that's Medal of Freedom winner Rush Limbaugh to all of you. and so we're going to have to build that up on our side because basically in the world of social media, it's all about quantity. It's how much content is being pushed into that ecosystem, and what that content looks like determines whether it's going to be a conservative or a left-leaning conversation. And so we're going to have to build up an entire progressive media infrastructure that is much bigger than a couple of pretty cool podcasts, in my view.
I was going to say, this was a really long wind-up for the podcast pitch. Okay, so we've won. Democrat has won now in November. What do Democrats...
Hey, can we clap for that?
Yeah, I mean, seriously. Knocking doors. Whoever the president-elect is, he or she, what are the first things that they have to do? What is the first message in office they need to send, and do they do anything with the courts?
Okay, I'm glad you asked this. So, in this world, the Democrats are in charge of the Senate too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, I just want to know.
I'm like moving to Maine, dude.
Okay. So the very first thing, so Inauguration Day happens. Everyone is on that dais out there outside the Capitol. There are millions of people. It is actually the largest inauguration crowd in history, period.
Because I ran it.
Donald Trump is being forced to sit there miserably. Melania probably doesn't show.
He's not going to go. You know he's not going to go.
He'll just be hanging onto the leg of the desk in the Oval Office.
It's like...
So as soon as that amazing day is over, instead of going to a party, the senators need to walk right in that door to the Capitol and eliminate the filibuster. The filibuster is the Senate rule.
Amen.
Nothing makes me happier than applause for filibuster elimination. For those who don't know, the filibuster is the rule that requires you to need 60 votes to do anything from pass the Green New Deal to name a post office. And the way the Senate is currently structured, where California, a large state full of liberals and a diverse population, has the same power as Wyoming, a small state, less diverse, less liberal, the Senate is going to be biased against Democrats. And there is no period of time in the lifetime of anyone in this room, and maybe the children of anyone in this room, where the Democrats will have 60 Senate seats again, as long as the Senate stays under its current construction. So if we want to pass anything, if you want to pass Medicare for all, Medicare for some, Medicare for one additional person in America, you got to get rid of the filibuster. Second thing we have to do, after they do that, pat themselves on the back, take the adoration of the filibuster elimination crowd like we have here, and then you make D.C. a state.
Yes.
And DC,
So you know, before you say this, one of the first decisions that Pfeiffer and I made jointly working in the White House was to put the taxation without representation license plates on the Beast, the limo. You had a choice. We were like, what's the choice? Of course you do. Yeah, important
the other
things
choice was
happen
make
that
DC a
first
state,
day.
but, But you have to make DC a state because one, it should be a state. It should be a state, but it also, I think, just coincidentally, would be 2 more Democratic senators since Hillary Clinton got 9 of 10 votes out of DC. And I promise you that if DC voted like Kentucky, Mitch McConnell would have made DC a state 2 years ago. And it's also the right thing to do. The people of DC have been screwed over by Congress for years. It's larger than it has a larger population than several states that have senators. And they already have electoral votes. Like, this is how bad the Senate problem is in America, where you have populations are moving towards larger urban bluer states, that it is actually technically possible for 18% of the United States population to have a majority of the United States Senate. Like that, like we can't live in a world where you have it is not a guarantee that our democracy will be around forever. And if we live in a world where over a sustained period of time, we have a progressive, diverse, growing majority that is being governed by a shrinking conservative white minority, that is something that we have never encountered here in this country and would have tremendous, or never encountered, at least in the modern post-Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act era. It would put tremendous strains, and I'm not positive that is a sustainable situation. Third thing you would do after you make DC a state, I would also give the people of Puerto Rico an option. If they wanted to be a state, they could do that, but that is their choice, not ours. The third thing I would do is and you can do this with your 50 votes, I would put 2 additional Supreme Court justices on the court. And now that is quite controversial and radical. Almost no one in Washington agrees with me on it. I would like to think that I am right and they are wrong. They just have not been official. They have not read the book yet, and once they do, they will be persuaded. But the number 9 is nowhere in the Constitution. We have been changing many times in the 19th century. We changed the number of justices on the court for all kinds of reasons, including once shrinking the court by 2 justices to prevent impeached but not removed President Andrew Johnson from adding new justices, which to me sounds like a relevant historical example we could apply to the current day. And the reason why this matters is, one, the Republicans we want to add justices. They already stole a justice from the court under Barack Obama when Mitch McConnell basically kept the Supreme Court with 8 justices, preventing it from ruling on several rulings for a year, so that Barack Obama could not appoint Merrick Garland to the court.
Never forget.
Which has shifted the court in the right, incredibly far to the right, then amplified by the fact that Senator Justice Anthony Kennedy, not a liberal by any stretch of the imagination, but someone who was the deciding vote on every case involving Roe v. Wade for the last 30 years, has now been replaced by Brett Kavanaugh, who is bad on every dimension.
Which is why I'm coming for Susan Collins. It's settled law.
And so for everyone who says, that just seems like a bridge too far to deal with the court, is that dirty pool? Here's the thing I would just leave you with, is that when Brett Kavanaugh is the age that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is today, my daughter will be, you haven't got to the bad part yet. My daughter will be 32. She turns 2 in May.
Well, way to drop the bomb there.
Well, I know. Now they're going to applaud for court reform going forward.
It's which we call court reform, not court packing, because court packing is bad branding. So you refer to it as court reform. That's in the book, too. I learned a lot from his book. Okay, so Pfeiffer has a lot of fans around the country, and most of them don't live anywhere near where his book events are, so I solicited Twitter for some hot ones. Here's a good one. Why haven't more strong or famous surrogates come out for one of the candidates? They could always throw their support behind the nominee if it doesn't pan out, but isn't now the time for greatest impact?
Well, some have, right?
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders has a wide array of celebrities out campaigning for him.
Yeah.
I mean, Ariana Grande, I think that's right.
Really?
I don't know if she's campaigning for him, but she does support him. Oh. And Cardi B.
Yeah, he really.
Mark Ruffalo. Bernie Sanders has a lot of them. Elizabeth Warren
AOC.
has a bunch of other, obviously AOC. Elizabeth Warren has Megan Rapinoe, a whole bunch of other ones. Mandy Moore has been campaigning for
Mayor Pete, that's
for Mayor
right.
Pete. But I think a lot of people in politics and in life are like the typical Democratic voter. Maybe a lot of the people here tonight who like all of them or like most of them, but can't figure out which one is the one they definitely think can win. And so, like, I think that's one of the reasons both in Iowa and Nevada we saw turnout in the caucuses that was less than people expected because people are nervous. We're sort of paralyzed with electoral anxiety and can't really figure out. Look, and I'm one of those people. Like I can convince myself of anyone's electability by breakfast and someone else by lunch. And so I think that's why a lot of sort of the big name people who've been out in previous elections have not been out in this one yet.
You don't think it's just?
But I do expect when we have a nominee, all the people will be out.
They better be, because we'll come for them. Okay, from Noga Stern, do you see a difference between how the media covered politics in 2016 and how it covers it today? What should change? Have they learned anything?
Have they learned anything? No.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like, yeah, I mean, some things they've learned. I think you are less likely, there's more fact checking of Trump in real time.
Right.
Like, I don't think it's sufficient necessarily.
Their fingers must bleed.
Yeah. I mean, but that is a thing, and you will see sometimes the chyrons on CNN or MSNBC will be like, Trump said this, it is wrong, right? Like they're more explicit in it. I think that they are still, I think there are real challenges with how the media covers women candidates and particularly women candidates of color. Mm-hmm. And because they're operating through this dumb prism of electability, and I think they believe, like either subconsciously or because of or whatever reasons, they have skepticism that someone other than a white man can win, and therefore the media tends, and voters, either leading or following the media or both, it's sort of a chicken egg thing, give male candidates and white male candidates more margin for error than they give female candidates. And I think that is still a problem, and that was a problem in 2016, and they haven't, I don't think they have fully figured that it's just still a problem, and it is still a problem. There are people who are doing a better job. There are more voices that were on TV who are better at it, but it's still a fundamental problem.
And then I think we have time for one more. From Michael Smith. Actually, we have time for two more. From Michael Smith. How has the birth of your daughter changed or shaped your political views?
This is a question I've been asked periodically.
By me at book events.
Yes. You even before, because my last book came out with a fortuitous timing of 3 weeks after my daughter was born.
Right.
You told me you were going to ask this question, and I still don't have a great answer for it.
That's okay.
It's okay. And
it's a safe space.
I think, there is nothing more tiresome than as a husband and father, I now understand, that is you shouldn't have to be married to a woman or have a daughter to understand misogyny in America. Like that.
Right.
It's not a thing, right? And then it's like, well, what are the other things that having a child would make you feel more strongly about? When it's
climate.
Well, climate. When it's like, yeah, we know, you don't have to have children to know that a melting planet is bad. Right.
Right.
But I think it's not an issue that I now care more about. Is I do feel more urgency in all of this since my daughter was born, right? And that it just feels like more. I think it's an extension of the responsibility I feel towards her.
Right.
That there's a tiny role that I can play somehow in trying to get us out of this mess. And whether we are successful at that is going to impact her life for years to come. Right. And that is, it just makes it feel more real. It makes it, when there's successes like 2018, feel more joyful. And when there are bad times, it makes it feel much worse, right? I think even though I have been known by many reporters who cover the White House to perhaps care too passionately about things big and small in politics, now it feels, there's a reality, a connection to the long-term consequences of the successes and failures of American politics that I'm not sure I had in the same visceral level in my gut as I do now.
It's good. Last question, sorry. I was thinking about your answer. It was so moving. So a lot of your fans on Twitter plow through your podcast and have already plowed through your book. And so they want to know from you, what are other things that you are reading or other podcasts you listen to that do not take away from your personal book sales, but that are that you would recommend for giving perspective or entertainment?
Okay, that's a great question. Here, in addition, everyone should buy Alyssa's 2 books, which are unbelievable. One of which is for sale here today, I think.
It is for sale here today.
So that's one. 2, another book that I read recently that I think is very helpful in understanding the moment we're in is Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein, which is a very Ezra Klein, big box heads in the back here. And which I think is helps understand how we got to this moment and what we can do about it. And I think it's very political science heavy, but it's very good. Podcasts stipulate everything on Crooked Media. Obviously, I am required by profession to listen to, and I think it's amazing. I spend most of my non-Crooked Media podcasts are not political.
That's good.
Well, it's like I work for a political podcast. Like, if you work in an insurance company, do insurance in your spare time? Like what other insurance do you do in your off hours?
Title insurance.
So a couple of other podcasts that I love that are not political at all. There's a podcast called The Rewatchables, which is on the Ringer Network, where a bunch of people watch old films that they have seen before that are on cable a lot, and they break it down. It's very entertaining. A local Philly favorite is the 76ers podcast, The Rights to Ricky Sanchez, which is my absolute favorite podcast. And I've been in Philly a bunch over the years for events, Pod Save America events, whatever. And I normally, because it's an obvious applause line, I yell, "Trust the process." But I was hesitant to do so, given it's been a rough couple of weeks for Sixers fans. But Spike and Mike, who are the hosts of The Rights to Ricky Sanchez, are a good way to help navigate the emotional ups and downs of this Sixers season if you were going through that as I am.
Breaking down old television is literally the crux of our friendship. I cannot believe we have not been on that podcast together.
It's movies. We could just start a podcast that was rewatching. Well, actually, someone did that already.
All old 90210 episodes.
Yeah, we could do that.
The moderate part of the Democratic Party has been getting 65 to 75% of the vote. What do you see likely in terms of who'll get out before Super Tuesday after South Carolina? Will Klobuchar and Warren, if they don't get 15, Buttigieg, if they don't get more than 15%, will they get out and clear the way so that there's a real contest in California?
I am not sure that maybe Klobuchar could, although she put $4 million in TV ads on the air in Super Tuesday states today. Warren is up on Super Tuesday states. Pete Buttigieg, I think, may also be up on Super Tuesday states. The problem is we have a massive design flaw in the Democratic calendar. It used to be that there were 10 days between South Carolina and Super Tuesday. So there would be a time for everything to settle. South Carolina would happen. Candidates would be faced to confront their fate. They talk to their donors. Their donors would say, "This is not going anywhere. You're out." They would be able to look in the mirror and see if this was worth going forward. For reasons that I don't fully understand, but are not actually entirely the DNC's fault. It's the fault of aggressive states. Super Tuesday is now 3 days later. So people aren't even going to have time to unpack their bags before people start voting. And people have already started voting. So many people have voted in California, I just read this, that if you took all the voters who voted in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, what is expected in South Carolina, you multiplied it by 2, it's still fewer people than have already cast a ballot in California. And so it's a big state. It only has 2 senators. It's a problem. But so I don't know. I think it is most likely that most of those candidates will stay. Now, being in the race and collapsing to a negligible number are also possible, right? Like, you could do very poorly in South Carolina, or have a terrible debate on Tuesday night, and that will be and then you may not get votes. So whether you're on the ballot or not, like Cory Booker's on the ballot in California. He hasn't been out of the race for a month now. Andrew Yang's on the ballot in California. In fact, both of them are on all the ballots. We have a collective action problem. If the goal is this should get down to 2 candidates between Bernie Sanders, who has won his advance to the finals, and one other candidate, every candidate has convinced themselves that they have a path, and they all do to varying degrees, although that path is much narrower than Sanders. Sanders is like driving down I-95. They're like on a tiny little path like this and up a mountain. So I don't know whether people will get out or not. I would be surprised if they did. So that tells you where this may be heading.
I have a whole page of questions. But I'll only ask one. I have one comment. All of us old people should retire to Wyoming and make those 2 senators mean something. My question is, Paul Krugman spoke to us a couple weeks ago, and he said that it didn't matter which Democrat won. They were only going to be able to play economically around the edges. Today, Bernie Sanders announced pre-K and nursery school for everybody for free. What do you think about that as an analysis of what really will happen if we do win?
I mean, without a doubt, you have to remember that even under the most optimistic scenario where Democrats win the Senate and they follow all of my advice, in the first 100 days, which they obviously should do, in the first 100 days, at least, we will have 51 to 52 senators, which means you're going to depend on Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, who is quite moderate, Doug Jones, if he hopefully wins. And so, like, there is going to be this, it is going to be hard to put forward and enact the most aggressive version of what our Democratic nominee has pushed for, whether that is on Medicare, on child care, on college, or whatever it is. It doesn't mean that something can't get done. If we keep the filibuster, nothing will get done. Zero, zip, zilch, nada. If we get rid of the filibuster, we can, like, I think a public option in healthcare is a very real possibility you could get that done if you get rid of the filibuster. I think you could make progress, but progress will be slower than it needs to be, even under the most optimistic scenarios. But we got to get started somewhere.
So I consider myself much more liberal than, say, my parents, their siblings, but they are all still very much going to vote for the Democrat no matter who it is, but I don't think that they're going to throw all of their weight behind it as much as I hope that they would if it's someone who's a bit more, let's say, Bernie Sanders as opposed to a Pete Buttigieg. So what would you recommend saying to them to convince them that they've really just got to give it their all, that they've got to do everything that they can that I want to do to just, we got to win this?
I think, so 2 points. Like, specifically, how do you convince your parents? I think it is, we get asked this question all the time about how you convince our parents to vote or to do more. How do you convince our recalcitrant friends to get involved? And I always think the first step is listening, which is like, what is the issue they are most passionate about? What's the thing they care most about? And I can promise you that no matter what they say, Donald Trump has done something terrible on that issue, right? So, like, there is a Cheesecake Factory menu of options here for you. The second question is, like, this is we're gonna face this challenge one of 2 ways. It's either my parents, my neighbor, my uncle, my aunt are Democrats, but they're more moderate than Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. I'm either not going to be able to get them to vote, or they won't knock doors with me, or whatever else. And then there's the reverse, right? Which is my brother, my sister, my cousin, my friend is way more liberal than Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar or whoever, and they're skeptical, right? And I think I would employ the listening method there as well, but also just as a party writ large, like, one person gets to be the nominee. The odds are it may not be the person you like most. It may end up being the person you like least. But whoever that person is, they're 1 trillion times better than Donald Trump. And as a party, like I made fun of the founders earlier, I will quote Ben Franklin right now, which is, we must hang together, we will all hang separately. And that is actually might be more literal than I intended it in this White House. So
I sit here thinking, how could 46% of the American people support this guy? So I want to ask you, what is our fundamental problem, in your view?
No, really.
I mean, I could answer that question, or I could try to attempt to answer that question for a long time. I think America is incredibly polarized right now. People, this is actually why I encourage everyone to read after you have purchased and read my book. Get Ezra's from the library. Ezra's book, because it helps explain that in America, political identities become our meta identity. It is like however else we identify ourselves, whether you are a liberal or a conservative, or a Republican or a Democrat, that has become more important than where you live, what you believe in. Trump has understood that about American politics. That's been a superpower. And even though in a blind taste test, if you were to read Trump's quotes, list some of his positions, list some of his contact to most of these voters, they would be appalled by it. But once he becomes a Republican and is therefore not a Democrat, they are for him. And so I don't believe we can fix the problem of polarization in America. We are headed in that direction. Something will maybe happen years from now where America will become less polarized, but we have been on an inexorable path in this direction. Every president has been more polarizing than the previous one. And every previous president has been the most polarizing president in history. And what I think, this is actually, I'm glad you asked this, because this is one of the reasons why I wrote the book, which is because we can't solve that problem, right? What we have to do is have a politics in America that engages the 40% of of American citizens who do not participate in the process. Because if we make American politics more democratic, where more people are involved, we can help with the problem of polarization, because you're bringing people in the process who were not previously involved, and if you make it more democratic in the sense that you can't win the White House with 3 million less votes, right? I think we should get rid of Electoral College. Like, if you make it so that people have to stand and fall on whether they can convince the majority of their agenda, our politics, people like Donald Trump may emerge again, but we're more able to hold those people accountable for the things they do.
And in Dan's book, the chapter, The Confederacy of Dunces, is very helpful to your question.
I'm curious about whether you have an opinion about whether we could ever break California into 3 different states, because it's been floated, and making Puerto Rico a state, making D.C. a state, but California just stands out there as the horrible example of what's wrong with the Senate.
I've read the book called, I think it's called something like Why Democrats Need to Fight Dirty, where this idea is proposed. There's another very aggressive idea about increasing the number of House seats to rise with the population, because we've had the same number for a very long time. All of those I think are interesting. The other idea I have is, has anyone asked the question about why we need 2 Dakotas? And I'm going to look, and I intend at some point when this book tour's over to look at some data about what would happen if you put West Virginia inside of Virginia, just to see what that would do. The thing about there is a Senate advantage to breaking up California. I don't think California is going to do this. There's a Senate advantage to doing it because you would get these other states. One of those states, in the way it's been talked about, probably has 2 Republican senators. It also creates an electoral college problem for Democrats because you're going to lose some of California's electoral college votes. And right now we have literally 0 to spare, right? Like, Google 269 and find out how easy it is for us to end up in that situation. And you do not want to know what happens if we end up in that situation.
If you were advising Bernie Sanders, what would you tell him to do with regards to the label socialism and how to handle it?
I am so glad you asked this question. I've been thinking about this basically nonstop since the Iowa caucus. I think it is sometimes you hear from not necessarily Bernie's campaign, but some of the leftist media figures, the people who support Bernie Sanders, are like, socialism is not as big a problem as you think. We have pulled Medicare for All. We pulled free college. They're all quite popular. And that is true. And then even if you do a pretty fair rendering of the upsides and downsides of those policies, you can get them close to even. And certainly be more popular than Donald Trump's plan to cut Medicare and Social Security to pay for a tax cut. But I think that is a fundamental misunderstanding of how socialism will play in this election. Politics, people think that presidential politics is about ideology and policy. Are you too left? Are you too right? Are you in the middle? And what are your plans? Like, how good are they? Do they help me? Sadly, that's wrong. I believe presidential politics is about identity and personality. And the evidence of this is that Donald Trump is president of the United States. And the way that the Republicans are going to weaponize socialism against Bernie is not to say that he is too far left for the country or his plans will bankrupt the government or tax you. They'll do that too. They want to make him scary. They want to take him and pull him outside of the common idea of what is the American tradition. And so the question is, how does Bernie take that on? And like, look, Alyssa and I have been on the tip of the spear of this. That is what Barack Obama was born in a madrasa. That's what the birth certificate is about. That's what they tried to do to him in 2008 and 2012. And the way Barack Obama was able to fight back at that was because he was able to tell his own story in a way that connected him to American people, even if they didn't look like him or came from different parts of the country. Right? That was, they saw him as a family man. They understood that he loved his daughters, loved his wife. The things their family did made sense to them. They knew that he had recently been someone who, just right before he became famous as a politician, was paying off he and Michelle were paying off their student loans. He rooted his life in, as he said in that famous 2004 convention speech, only in America can my story happen. So what Bernie Sanders needs to do, and I think he has a great ability to do it, but I'm worried about reluctance based on the 60 Minutes interview we did, is like if I was on Bernie Sanders' campaign, I would get through Super Tuesday, and then I would start advertising in the swing states bio ads about his life as someone who grew up in Brooklyn, someone who was inspired to take on healthcare as a life cause because his mother got sick, someone who has been fighting for working people his entire life. I would have footage of him fighting for working people at all ages, which is easy because Bernie Sanders was young.
Once.
And then 30 years ago, he became old, and he has not aged a day since. But like, he's going to have to be willing to tell his story and fight back. And he has to root his political views in the American tradition. He gave a speech on democratic socialism earlier in the campaign where he tied what he believes as the next iteration of New Deal democratic politics. I think that there is a foundation there to work with. He's going to have to do more.
What do you think Stacey Abrams' chances are becoming our vice presidential nominee?
I hope they're quite high.
No, I'm serious.
I mean, dead serious. I think that it all depends on who the nominee is, right? I think that there will be, I'm guessing here, like obviously the first test is, can this person be president? We call that the Sarah Palin test. And like Stacey Abrams obviously passes that test, I'll do a whole bunch of other ones. And then I suspect that the next thing that and Alyssa knows this better than anyone because she helped run this process for Barack Obama when he picked Joe Biden, is the next thing is, can they work together, right? And then the third thing I think the candidate will be looking for is diversity in gender, in ethnicity, in point of view. I don't think they'll care about what state they're from because that never has really led to, like, we'll put Georgia on the map, and I don't think that's a deciding factor. I think Stacey Abrams would be an amazing vice president. There's a part of me that really wish she had run for president this time, but I understand why she didn't. I hope she doesn't get the opportunity to run next time because I hope we win this time. So I think it'd be very likely that a Joe Biden, a Bernie Sanders, most prominently, I think would put Stacey Abrams on the ticket. Maybe some other candidate would as well, but I think she's going to be on everyone's short list.
As you said, the turnout in the first 3 states has been quite low. Yet the media is ready to anoint Bernie Sanders because he won the first 3 states. Even you said that he has many paths now to the White House. Is there something wrong with that picture?
Well, there's certainly something like that is an accurate assessment of the process we currently have. I think the process is wrong and broken and should be changed. And I think we should learn the lesson. So here would be my recommendations, right? First, we should get rid of caucuses. And I say this as someone like Alyssa who Barack Obama wouldn't be president without the Iowa caucus. But like, forget the counting errors that we have had.
But now that we're good.
Yeah, now that we're Yeah, burn that bridge behind us. Sorry, people. It's simply an anti-democratic process. Like, you can't be the party of working people and have a process that makes it hard for shift workers to come do that. And also, it's just like, here's an example. Like, you raised the point of how small turnout was. Turnout was high for a caucus, but I think when it's all said and done, Bernie Sanders will end up winning by a large margin with less than 40,000 votes. There are 600,000 Democrats in Nevada. So that's a tiny fraction of the people, and it's a missed opportunity. I think Bernie Sanders would have won a Nevada primary by a similar margin. He's very strong in that state. But it's a missed opportunity not to engage those people. Second thing is, I love Iowa. I love New Hampshire. They shouldn't be at the front of the line anymore. It's a very complicated process to figure out what the right order is. There's a very good idea that an advisor to Mike Bloomberg floated that I mostly credit him for, but sometimes I forget to, which is you take the 3 closest states from the previous presidential election, you make them 1, 2, 3. Because one of the real sad parts about Iowa this time is, like, I was there for 4 days. I met like the most talented field organizers you could possibly imagine, who've knocked every door in that state. They've called every person. They've built these incredible lists. They've built these local volunteer organizations. And then the day after the Iowa caucus, they got on a plane and flew to another state, and they are never going to return. When Iowa was a competitive state, like it was in 08 and 12, it was like all that effort in the caucus was helping us organize for the general election. Hillary Clinton lost Iowa by 10. Whoever our nominee is probably on a path to also lose it and probably won't contest it. So if we were to follow this plan I'm taking credit for, it would go Michigan, New Hampshire would still be second, ironically enough, and Wisconsin would be third. So those would be the first 3 states. Next thing I would do is I would get rid of this stupid proportional delegate thing we have. It's too confusing. I would either go to, I would get rid of proportional allocation by congressional district is wild, and we should not do that, and no one can figure it out. But another thing that I think is interesting is I would do ranked choice voting in the primary. Any event where people applaud elimination of the filibuster and ranked choice voting is my kind of crowd. And the benefit of ranked choice voting is one thing that is really nice about the Iowa caucus is when you campaign in Iowa, you have to appeal to the supporters of other candidates, because if they don't get to 15%, you have the opportunity to get them to come caucus for you. So it's a very collegial campaign where the campaigns are constantly reaching out to all the voters. The way to replicate that without the anti-democratic parts of caucuses is ranked choice voting. Because if you want, like if Joe Biden needed Amy Klobuchar's supporters to put him as number 2 or 3 on their list, it's less likely that he would attack her. I don't think he would attack her anyway. As an example, perhaps Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg would have held some of their inner hostilities in during that debate.
Aren't you perfect? That was so funny. Is that it?
Well, can I say one thing before we wrap up? I see the wrap-up people standing here, but this is the hardest part of the process. We are in the darkest days of the primary. Like I said, the candidate you love most maybe not doing as well as you want. The candidate you love least maybe doing better. The campaigns are fighting with each other. The candidates are yelling at each other. I describe this part of the primary as the 6.5 hour, at the 6th hour of a 7-hour family car ride. In this case, Amy Klobuchar is your mom. Pete Buttigieg is your annoying younger brother. They are not getting along. But like I have sensed, as I've been doing these book events, like a deepening depression within the Democratic electorate. You're admitting to it. That's the first step. And you see it in polls. 4 months ago, everyone believed that we had a very good chance to beat Trump. Now, 2/3 of Democrats think we're going to lose. Yes, exactly. And the thing, I understand that feeling because the primary's been tense. Donald Trump has been on a crime spree since getting off for his previous crime. And it does feel, there's an impotence that comes from that, right? Which is like, he committed a crime. He announced it to the world. His chief of staff admitted to it. And then the Republicans, despite the fact Democrats convinced the entire country that he committed a crime, just said, we're good, and let him off. And then he committed more crimes. And so that makes us feel impotent. But here's the thing that I think is so important, that I just want to leave everyone with, which is, yes, Donald Trump has advantages in this election. He is an incumbent, and he's an incumbent who cheats. So those are advantages. But this is an incredibly winnable election. We absolutely can win this election. Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. She lost by 70,000 votes over 3 states, yours included. All of you have agency here. And just like, but we're not going to win if everyone gets depressed, if everyone sort of checks out and says it's not going to matter, because we know how to win. It's how we won in 2018. It's how Chrissy Houlihan got elected, is that people did the work, right? It started the day after Trump was elected. It started at the Women's March. It started at the airport. It started the March for Our Lives. There was activism, right? For all the talk about smart democratic strategies and messaging, that's all on the margins. What mattered was people, right? It was a movement from the bottom up. And we can do it again. And the thing that I just want to leave everyone with, besides the image of Trump sitting there watching a Democrat take the oath of office, is just imagine this irony of when this is all said and done. We've been through all of this. And what would the takeaway from this period in American history is that the election of America's worst citizen sparked a wave of citizenship that went on for decades, right? Like, that is the opportunity we have.